Today, we're going to learn why the seafood on your plate might not be what you thought you were buying. As part of our Iberostar Wave of Change responsible seafood strategy, we're confronting our own gaps in data to ensure sufficient traceability to guarantee responsibility of our seafood. Achieving this globally in seafood supply chains could create a tipping point for the ocean as a solution to climate change and a source of food to feed the next billion. Let's explore some of these topics. My name is Dr. Megan Morikawa, and I'm the Global Director of Sustainability for Iberostar Group. And it's my pleasure today to have a great panel of speakers who are going to talk to us about the topic of the power of traceability in seafood. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to announce Lindsay Jennings, who is the Project Director for Traceability Division for Fishwise. To also introduce Justin Baugh, who's the Director of Sustainability of Fishin Co. Introduce Frank Terzoli, Senior Program Officer for Seafood Traceability of the World Wildlife Fund. Introduce Natalie Miaoulis, Conservation Practitioner for the Nature Conservancy. And Adriana Sanchez, who's Iberostar's Strategy Director for Responsible Consumption of Seafood. So let's start us off with the first big elephant in the room, which is, what does traceability actually mean? And if we could start with Natalie at the Nature Conservancy, what does traceability mean to you and your organization?
Thank you for that. For the Nature Conservancy, seafood traceability is the ability to determine where, when, how, and by whom seafood was caught, so that we can use that information to manage fisheries sustainably, and so that the consumer knows where their seafood comes from. When things are not measured, they tend not to be managed. So the Nature Conservancy, we really want to focus on data collection, but also, is that data, how is it collected? Is it reliable? And can it be used for management?
That's really great. And I think it's a lot of how it is that we process the products, the seafood products that it is that we're purchasing. So Justin, over at Fishin Co, can you tell us from an industry perspective what traceability means to you and your company?
Certainly. So for us at the Fishin Co, traceability is what underpins all of our corporate responsibility initiatives. We have a lot of policies and requirements and principles, and all of these things really make for a great story. They help us tell our customers and partners and others, who the fishing company is and who we want to be and where we're trying to go. But traceability is what really brings life to that narrative. It gives a meaning behind the story and puts power in the words that we use. We strive to be a good and responsible company, and that's the character that we want to have for our company. But traceability is, we see traceability as the integrity that backs up that character.
I like that, the integrity that backs up that character. Frank, do you want to give us a little perspective on how you guys define traceability and what that means to World Wildlife Fund?
Sure, and thanks for asking. So traceability is a linked series of events that are named consistently throughout the supply chain, linked together in an unbroken chain to retain the pedigree of a product. By doing this, we allow information to be passed on from the first mile, which is on board vessel, on board farm, all the way up into the consumer.
I think that's a pedigree of the product. I like that description. Lindsay at Fishwise, can you give us what you guys define as traceability and what that means for Fishwise?
Absolutely. I think it takes on a little bit of what everyone had said. I believe, and I think Fishwise believes, at the heart of it, traceability is simply a tool that gives you the ability to track information about the origin and journey of a seafood product as it passes through the supply chain. I think at the heart of it, it's about the power of information. Kind of what Natalie was saying, the who, the what, the when, the where. That information is the cornerstone of traceability, is the foundation of a good traceability system. And I think that information, whether it's about your salmon, your scallops, or your tuna, can really have the power to prevent illegal products from coming into the market or mislabeled products from coming to market. I think can help improve fisheries management, but also support equitable and fair working conditions for seafood laborers, both within the U.S. and abroad.
Adriana, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, actually, I have a question. We mentioned that collection of data helps with management. Can you guys provide a little example on how that helps with management, the data collected?
Sure. Maybe this is something that Frank can tell us on WWF on how this data collection actually helps us with management itself.
Great question. Thank you very much. So it's very important. I mean, in order to do a full assessment of the marine resource and biomasses, we have to have the information that's in a manageable place that we can digest, and so that we can give to our scientific community so that they can make the assessments of the marine biomass in order to set quotas, in order to help with policy, in order to help industry to find substitutions or so that we can manage what we have as far as the species and as far as the planet, and the impacts that are happening today, aside from just overfishing and IUU, are with global warming and other factors that are certainly detrimental to some of the species on the planet. So without the proper data collected from traceability, it's almost impossible to make those assessments.
I think it's very clear that traceability is a really fundamental part to be able to ensure the sustainability of these seafood products. And I think we all would hope that we know where our products come from. But it also strikes me that we're talking about it because it's not so easy to do. And I'm wondering, Justin, if you'd be willing to tell us a little bit from an industry perspective, what have been some of the challenges of collecting the data needed to demonstrate this traceability?
That's a very good question. And really, I mean, that is the main challenge, is just collecting data. It seems like it should be a simple exercise, but really collecting data at the scale that we're working in is kind of a monstrous task. Seafood is a very old industry, and currently every country we operate in, including the US, and maybe even especially the US, is really lingering in a paper-based management systems. And until we can find ways to digitize the information, we're going to continue to struggle with that collection and with being able to share quality traceability data. But I think even before that, one of the things we all have to do is just agree on what traceability is and why it's important. We are kind of reaching that agreement at the end of the supply chain where most of us are sitting, but we have to turn that focus more upstream now. There is still this large separation and communication barrier between the different stages in the supply chain, especially at the beginning. If it's just between one or two stages, or a handful of actors, that barrier, you can kind of overcome it just with persistence and but when you multiply that barrier by 5 to 8, sometimes in our case even 13 different steps in a supply chain, and in some species a single stage in that supply chain can even have up to 200 different organizations that all operate there, like in a fish farming. That communication problem just becomes like you're shouting in a hurricane. There's just too many things swirling around and too many messages for any one company to really be able to be heard. So if we're not all shouting the same message, all we're doing really is just adding more noise to the cacophony.
This is also one of the challenges that we've had at Iberostar Group 2. One of the challenges for collecting data is that often the information we need to know to assess sustainability just isn't in the product details, right? And with a lot of this sort of information, we've got information about the quality of the fish, how it is prepared, how it was frozen, from who it came from, but we don't necessarily have how it was caught, or whether or not it has a certain sort of certification, or whether that certification has been maintained throughout. And so I think this adds a little bit to the dialogue of the complexities of being able to collect this information, as well as what Justin is talking about, a little bit of this consensus. But I think we also know that traceability is a really important part of being able to unlock how seafood can be responsible globally, something that in our first seminar series we were looking for whether or not this was possible, and I think we think it is possible to have global sustainable seafood. But I'm wondering, Frank, if you can tell us a little bit about how traceability has actually helped to uncover some important social or environmental issues that were otherwise hidden. Because there's a goal, it's not just to collect a lot of information, it's also to find some of these hidden tensions as well. So Frank, can you tell us a little bit about how you've dealt with that?
Sure, and I do want to just touch a little bit on Justin's point, because he made some great points there. But if you look at the scope and the complexity of the seafood supply chain in general, if you take all the other proteins combined, whether that be beef, chicken, pork, you're talking about in the 70s. And if you talk about the commercially sold seafood items, you're talking over 2,800 different seafood items that are all fished in different ways, processed in different ways by upwards of 300,000 different manufacturing companies all over the world, right? And upwards of 1.2 million vessels fishing on our world oceans. So the complexity is a daunting task, and to digitize that first mile where you're actually getting the original documentation of what happened aboard the vessel in that catch, that is so critical in the launch of the supply chain and a full pedigreed digitized data stream. But to highlight what you said and to go back to that, we have proven over and over again where vessels that are fishing illegally in IUU in different oceans of the world have literally painted their new name on their vessel, changed the numbers on the vessel's hulls so that they could catch product fraudulently, deliver it to market without being licensed or registered by not only a municipality, but maybe not even licensed by that country. So we've caught a lot of illegal actors that are exploiting the ocean's resources multiple times, and it continues to happen. So with traceability and with the verification of data in the supply chain and then through the supply chain or through the supply stream, we can validate those vessels, the licensing, the data that is associated with a transaction and with a vessel's profile.
I think that's great to really illustrate the fact that this is about the legality of seafood. I would imagine that there are also some cases where uncovering this sort of information has also uncovered some social issues as well. Natalie, do you have any experiences and or stories from the Nature Conservancy where traceability has been able to bring to light some of these issues?
Yes, thanks, Frank. Here in the Bahamas, traceability has really helped us drive accountability. So in the Bahamas instance, we had fishers that were catching spiny lobster and bringing it to processing centers. And through our improvement projects, the processors decided we will no longer accept undersized lobsters, so lobsters that do not meet the minimum size requirements for maturity. And that was really great, but they were unable to determine which fishers were catching the small lobsters. But through traceability, we were able to determine which fishers were catching undersized lobsters. And so much so that when the fishers brought their lobsters to the processing center, if they brought undersized, the processor was allowed to say, we will no longer buy from you anymore. And this was powerful for the country because it really drove accountability and therefore change. And what we saw was just from that traceability and being able to determine which fishers are catching what and who are they selling to, we were able to actually transform the entire industry in the country. And now fishers no longer want to catch the undersized because they know they can't sell it. There's no market. So that really helped drive accountability from us, drive the social change in the fishers, but also to bring about an ecological impact of sustainability. And I just want to say as well, when we talk about what is traceability and why is it important, I always say that traceability or managing fisheries is like managing your bank account. how do you manage fisheries if you don't know, or how do you manage your bank account if you don't know how much money is in there and what your expenses are? It's impossible. So that's really what traceability and being able to track our seafood, that's really what that allows us to do, is to see how much seafood do we have, how much is being taken out, so that we can manage it properly.
I think that's a really great example, Natalie, of how TNC is improving traceability in the Bahamas and how that has some really important social implications as a result of that. I'm sure each of you guys have similar stories. Lindsay, do you want to tell us some examples of how Fishwise is working on improving traceability in seafood supply chains?
Yeah, absolutely. Seafood is one of the most heavily traded food commodities, so we definitely have our work cut out for us. Fishwise works at a couple different levels to try and transform supply chains. We work in deep partnership with individual companies and also their suppliers. We try to provide customized work plans to support the businesses in their own due diligence in trying to combat illegal fishing or reduce risk of these products from entering their supply chains, and really trying to identify initial steps for the company to then take to engage with their own supply chains. We can't work in silos. This is a complex issue. We need everybody from the top down and bottom up to take responsibility and be accountable for kind of playing their role. We also work a lot in these multi-stakeholder collaborations to try to convene the seafood industry, governments, funders, other NGOs as well. We've definitely sat in conversations with the Nature Conservancy and World Wildlife Fund, trying to have a conversation around knowledge sharing, traceability best practices. No one wants to recreate the wheel, and where can we figure out how to connect those dots and share out some of our lessons learned and best practices so that others can feel empowered to then implement some of this work into their own business practices and supply chains or day-to-day work. So it's a little bit of small thinking company by company, but also bigger picture thinking as well.
I think that's a really great example of how this needs to be dialogues that are had across industries. I actually have a question for Justin, which is clearly one of the ways in which you guys are helping to improve traceability is by implementing that within an industry sort of perspective. But a question I have for you is, was there an aha moment when you guys, or a tipping point at which you were able to say, okay, this is actually achievable to get all this information for the products that we're using? Or was it kind of a constant battle and journey to be able to get there?
It's definitely a constant battle, and I can't even say that we've gotten there yet. It's an ongoing thing, and I'm not sure if we'll ever reach 100%, but we are definitely going to strive for it. But I would say there've been lots of aha moments through this process. We've not only learned about traceability and how to build the systems. We've learned also how much we just didn't know about our own supply chain. We knew basics, of we bought fish from this plant and it came from this farm and that kind of thing. But, just getting into the complexity of all the hatcheries that start the process and all the things that go into feed components and how often those farms are feeding, what their cycles are, and then we start working with groups like the Sustainable Fisheries Partnership on zone management issues and realizing that we thought we knew a lot, but there are so many other guys out there that are not in our supply chain, and they're all affecting each other, and the web is just so big and vast that we kind of were humbled quite a bit when we after our first foray into traceability. We had these grand designs that in a year we were going to have 100% traceability, and we realized quickly that it just wasn't possible. We weren't going to get there for several many years. We're looking more like a 10-year project now. So yeah, that was one of the aha moments for us is just realizing how little control we had over such a supply chain, and that's one of the reasons we started working with the global dialogue of seafood traceability. If you don't know what that is, exactly, you should go look it up definitely, because it's absolutely going to make huge changes in the traceability of seafood and the seafood industry, because it's developed. We've developed a standard that, well, for the fishing company, it helps us know how to collect information, but we really see this being used for innovation in the space, and allow for things that we're not able to do. There are so many different cases of how to collect data in different places, and they're all, they all have their unique challenges, and somebody's going to develop a unique way to do that, and it's going to fit that one case. But with a standard, everybody will be able to utilize that information.
But I think one of the things that we confront as a tourism operators, we would love to have this dialogue also extend to our clients and our audiences on our Wave of Change platforms. And so, Lindsay, if you'd be willing to close us out on what are some things that consumers can do to help support traceability efforts?
Absolutely. I think this is a question that we always ask ourselves, and at least I know my family always asks me. I think the best place to start is really about asking questions. Whether at the grocery store, a restaurant, you're sitting at an Iberostar restaurant, ask your seafood counter staff or your server, do you serve sustainable seafood? What species is it? How was it caught? Where was it caught? I think companies and restaurants are really listening, and these questions kind of signal to them and send an important signal that consumers care about the sustainability, and they care about the origin of their seafood, and that it's a responsibility of companies to have data in place and transparency and traceability practices in place to be able to answer those questions. I think, too, it's also really important to share that story. Traceability, really, in a nutshell, is a fancy word for a seafood story. And being able to share that story with your friends and with your family and kind of see that aha moment empowers you, but also them as well, to make better purchasing decisions, to learn a little bit more, to want to share that out. And I think in turn it has this domino effect of you then are able to make better purchasing decisions, which support resilient, healthy oceans and enough seafood for both now and in the future.
I think that's a really great example of how the decisions that we make as consumers and the questions that we ask as consumers are one really powerful tool for our ability to help support traceability efforts. I think that's a really great summary, and we're looking forward to exploring not only how you can ask these sorts of questions as a consumer, but also hopefully discover a little bit more about the local fisheries and the places that you're visiting, which is a topic we'll be exploring tomorrow in looking at small-scale fisheries, as well as a much longer discussion on what consumers can do in order to help a commitment to responsible seafood in our discussion on Friday. So with that, thank you all so much for a really great conversation about traceability and seafood supply chains, and we're looking forward to continuing the discussion into the future.